Listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to say will either wake you up or expose everything you've been avoiding. Most people think they know why attraction happens, why relationships fall apart, why some men effortlessly pull attention while others stay invisible. They think it's about looks, age, money, or charm. But that's a lie. The real truth is deeper, sharper, and far more uncomfortable. And once you hear it, you'll never see yourself or your relationships the same way again. There are certain traits, rare traits, that instantly change how a woman experiences a man. Traits that shift her from, "I'm not sure," to, "I can't stop thinking about him." Traits that younger women notice in older men not because of age, but because of evolution. Traits that you can develop, that you can build, that you can master. If you're willing to hear the hard truths nobody else has the courage to say. And before this video ends, you're going to understand exactly why some men are unforgettable while others disappear. You're going to understand why peace is more powerful than pride, why clarity beats confidence, and why purpose attracts more than appearance ever will. You're going to learn the psychological patterns that shape feminine attraction and the emotional habits that elevate a man without him saying a single word. If you stay until the end, you won't just hear information. You'll hear the truth that will shift the way you think, the way you show up, and the way people experience you. This isn't about dating. This isn't about age. This is about becoming the man who changes the atmosphere the moment he walks in. So if you're ready to hear what most men will never learn, keep watching. This will stay with you long after the video ends. Calm dominance is one of those qualities people feel before they consciously recognize it. It's the quiet weight in a man's presence, the grounded tone of his voice, the way he listens with full awareness instead of rushing to speak. And the truth is, this trait doesn't come from age alone. It comes from a man who has lived deeply, reflected honestly, and outgrown the need to seek validation. Younger women respond to this not because it is older, but because it is rarer, and rarity is powerful. When a man carries calm dominance, there's an unmistakable steadiness in the way he interacts with the world. You can see it in his posture, his decisions, his reactions, even in the silence between his words. It's the energy of someone who no longer feels the need to impress, because he has already confronted the parts of himself he once tried to hide. He has wrestled with failure, heartbreak, embarrassment, setbacks, yet emerged with an inner stability that cannot be faked. Younger women pick up on that stability instantly. It's not something you need to announce. It's not something you need to perform. In fact, the moment you try to show it, you prove you don't have it. Calm dominance is natural, not rehearsed. It's reflected in the way a man responds instead of reacts, the way he observes instead of panics, the way he leads without forcing direction. One of the reasons younger women find this trait so compelling is because it provides emotional safety. Not protection in the physical sense, but protection from chaos. A calm, grounded man becomes a space where she doesn't have to worry about emotional volatility. He's not unpredictable. He doesn't shift from affection to anger without warning. He doesn't crumble under stress. His calmness becomes a type of structure, something she can lean into without losing herself. Modern relationships often fail because people react from their wounds instead of their wisdom. A man with calm dominance has learned to differentiate the two. He doesn't let his insecurities lead the conversation. He doesn't allow ego to sabotage connection. And he doesn't need to win an argument to feel powerful. His strength comes from managing himself, not controlling others. This is why younger women look at such a man with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. They sense there is depth beneath the surface. They feel that his calmness is not laziness or passivity, but the calmness of someone who has faced himself, someone who has earned discipline, someone who understands that power doesn't need theatrics and masculinity doesn't need noise. There's also a psychological element at play. Calm dominance signals competence. In human behavior, competence is one of the strongest attractors, stronger than looks, status, or even charm. When a man stays composed in unpredictable situations, when he can navigate tension with clarity, when he doesn't let external circumstances dictate his internal world, it shows that he can handle life. And being able to handle life is profoundly attractive. Younger women are often surrounded by men who mirror youthful impulsiveness. Quick to react, easily triggered, emotionally chaotic. So when they encounter a man who is self-governed, it feels refreshing, it feels new, it feels safe. It feels like leadership without force. And that distinction matters because real dominance is never about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself to the point where people naturally trust your direction. A calm, dominant man doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He doesn't need to argue to prove he's right. He doesn't need to flaunt his value. His presence communicates everything. People listen because his energy demands attention without seeking it. People follow because his clarity creates direction without manipulation. This type of presence is something younger women feel immediately, even before they understand why. Another thing that makes calm dominance magnetic is that it brings emotional clarity into interactions. Younger women often feel the difference between a man who is centered and a man who is fragmented. The centered man gives them space, not pressure. He allows connection to flow naturally, rather than trying to accelerate it out of insecurity. He sets the tone without demanding control. He creates an environment where communication feels real, not performative. And all of this stems from a simple truth. Calm dominance is the result of a man who has confronted the moments that once made him reactive. He has confronted disappointment without letting it harden him. He has confronted rejection without letting it shrink him. He has confronted challenges without letting them define him. Through that process, he learned that silence is more powerful than shouting, patience stronger than impulsiveness, and emotional balance more masculine than aggression. That is why younger women are drawn to it. It reflects maturity, intelligence, and emotional discipline. It reflects a man who moves through life with intention rather than chaos. He doesn't chase. He doesn't rush. He doesn't explain himself unnecessarily. He carries himself with the quiet assurance of someone who knows his worth, but doesn't need others to confirm it. The beautiful thing is that any man, no matter his age, can develop this. It's not a biological advantage, it's a psychological evolution. It requires awareness, self-regulation, reflection, and the willingness to outgrow the behaviors that kept you small. Women respond to the man who has done this inner work because his presence becomes a mirror for their own peace. He doesn't exhaust them emotionally. He doesn't confuse them. He doesn't destabilize them. Instead, he brings clarity. He brings consistency. He brings direction. Calm dominance isn't about being older. It's about being escrow. And once a man reaches that level, everything changes. Not because he becomes attractive to others, but because he becomes aligned with himself. A man who masters his inner world no longer competes with anyone outside of it. And that is the kind of man the world can feel, even before he speaks. Sis. Emotional intelligence is one of those qualities people assume they understand, yet very few have truly mastered it. And that is exactly why it stands out so powerfully. Younger women aren't drawn to older men because of experience alone. They're drawn to the way that experience shapes a man's emotional awareness. It creates a presence that is mature, patient, grounded, and deeply attentive. A presence that feels different because it is different. When a woman interacts with a man who has emotional intelligence, she feels it immediately. He listens with intention instead of reacting from ego. He responds with clarity instead of defensiveness. He acknowledges her emotions without trying to fix, dismiss, or control them. And that makes her feel understood in a way most men never learned how to provide. This is rare. In a world full of emotional noise, arguments, misunderstandings, impulsive reactions, unresolved trauma. A man who shows emotional maturity becomes a calming contrast. He brings precision to communication. He brings depth to connection. He brings stability to uncertainty. And younger women gravitate toward that because it removes the emotional unpredictability they often experience with men their age. Younger men, not by fault but by lack of experience, often operate from unprocessed emotions. They take things personally. They project insecurities. They respond from fear instead of awareness. An emotionally intelligent man doesn't do that. He knows the difference between what he feels and what reality is. He doesn't weaponize emotions. He doesn't punish someone for being vulnerable. He doesn't confuse intensity with connection. Instead, he understands that emotional presence is not about reacting. It's about staying conscious. It's about observing internal responses without letting them take over. It's about creating space for both people to communicate honestly. And this level of presence comes from having lived long enough, reflected long enough, and healed deeply enough to recognize the patterns that create chaos. Younger women find this incredibly attractive because emotional intelligence creates safety. Not physical safety, psychological safety. The safety to express without judgment. The safety to feel without fear. The safety to be imperfect without being criticized. This type of emotional environment is one of the strongest foundations for connection, and very few men know how to create it. A man with emotional intelligence knows how to handle conflict without escalating it. He knows how to discuss issues without attacking character. He knows how to take responsibility without losing dignity. And most importantly, he knows how to stay present when emotions rise. This is what makes him feel trustworthy, not because he avoids problems, but because he navigates them with maturity. Emotional intelligence also gives a man clarity, a clarity younger women recognize instantly. He knows what he wants, what he needs, and what he stands for. This eliminates confusion. Confusion is one of the biggest sources of emotional exhaustion in relationships. But a man who understands himself communicates clearly. He sets boundaries without fear. He expresses affection without hesitation. He is firm when he needs to be, and soft when it matters. That balance is powerful. There's also something deeply philosophical about emotional intelligence. It reflects a man who has confronted himself, a man who has observed his patterns, questioned his reactions, and taken responsibility for his emotional world. This level of self-awareness gives him an ability to connect beyond surface-level attraction. He sees beyond the drama. He understands the dynamics beneath the words. He hears what is said and what is unspoken. Women, especially younger women, feel seen in a way that is rare. They don't have to explain everything. They don't have to repeat themselves. They don't have to act out to be understood. The emotionally intelligent man notices shifts in tone, changes in energy, subtle cues that reveal deeper emotions, and he responds with thoughtfulness, not confusion. This creates a connection that feels emotionally rich, something younger women crave because it stands out from the typical shallow or chaotic interactions they're used to. When they interact with a man who understands emotional nuance, it feels refreshing, it feels meaningful, it feels safe. And safety is one of the strongest forms of attraction. Another reason younger women gravitate toward emotionally intelligent men is because these men communicate with intention. They don't manipulate. They don't play games. They don't use silence as punishment. They don't act distant to gain power. Their communication comes from sincerity, not strategy. This creates an environment where trust grows naturally instead of forcefully. An emotionally intelligent man doesn't get lost in emotional chaos because he understands the patterns behind it. He recognizes triggers. He recognizes unresolved wounds, his own and others. He understands that everyone carries emotional history, and he approaches it with empathy rather than frustration. This empathy is not softness, it's emotional strength. It requires control, awareness, and maturity. Younger women admire this because it reflects leadership, real leadership, not dominance or control. Leadership in emotional intelligence looks like guiding a conversation toward resolution instead of conflict, choosing understanding over ego, and creating stability where others create confusion. This type of leadership is magnetic. But the most fascinating part is this: emotional intelligence makes a man more selective, not more desperate. When a man understands emotions, he values energy, he recognizes tension early, he notices unhealthy patterns quickly, he chooses peace, and that makes him harder to access and therefore more desirable. Younger women are drawn to men who don't give their emotional attention to everyone because it signals discipline and self-respect. Emotional intelligence also creates emotional intimacy, something far deeper than attraction. Younger women crave emotional intimacy more than they crave attention. Emotional intimacy makes them feel safe, valued, and understood. It allows vulnerability without fear, and an emotionally intelligent man makes vulnerability feel natural instead of risky. When a man has this level of emotional awareness, he becomes a grounding presence. Not because he tries to be one, but because he has become one through experience, reflection, and growth. He becomes someone who brings clarity, not confusion. Someone who speaks truth, not chaos. Someone who holds emotions, not suppresses them. And that is the real reason emotional intelligence is irresistible. A man who understands emotions understands people. A man who understands people understands connection. A man who understands connection understands love, and in a world full of noise, games, ego, and emotional immaturity, that level of understanding is rare, and rarity is naturally attractive. Because in the end, emotional intelligence isn't just a trait, it's the doorway to deeper connection, and only the man who has mastered himself can truly open it. Purpose is one of the strongest signals of maturity. And it's something younger women feel instantly when they interact with a man who's truly aligned with his direction. It isn't about having a perfect life plan or a flawless career. Purpose is a way of moving through the world. It's the energy of a man who wakes up knowing what he's building, what he stands for, and what he refuses to tolerate. And that energy is unmistakable. It shapes his presence, his decisions, his boundaries, and even the way he carries himself in silence. When a man has purpose, he doesn't drift. He doesn't get lost in distractions. He doesn't seek approval from anyone. He becomes anchored, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. This anchoring creates something younger women rarely find in their own age group: a sense of stability. A sense of clarity, a sense of direction. It's not the direction he gives her, it's the direction he gives himself. That's what pulls her in. Younger women often meet men who are still figuring things out, which is normal. But what stands out is the contrast between a man who is lost and a man who is building. Purpose gives a man structure. It gives him priority. It gives him discipline. It turns, "I'll try," into "I will." It turns, "maybe later," into "I'm working on it now." Purpose changes how a man speaks and how he lives. A man without purpose moves reactively. A man with purpose moves intentionally. And intention is attractive. Younger women feel safe around a man with purpose, not because he controls everything, but because he controls himself. He chooses his battles. He manages his time. He invests his energy wisely. He doesn't chase temporary pleasures at the cost of long-term growth. He understands that every decision is a vote for the man he is becoming. This level of awareness elevates him. It separates him. Purpose also gives a man emotional consistency. When you know where you're going, you don't get shaken by every opinion, every setback, every misunderstanding. You don't explode over small issues. You don't become consumed by insecurity. You learn to see the bigger picture. You learn to stay focused even when life becomes chaotic. This emotional consistency makes a man feel grounded, mature, and masculine in the deepest sense. Younger women feel this as emotional security. They sense that he won't collapse under pressure. They sense that he won't abandon everything when things get difficult. They sense that he has a vision bigger than his fears. This inspires trust, not because he demands it, but because he embodies it. Purpose also shapes how a man loves. When a man has direction, he doesn't fall into relationships out of loneliness or boredom. He chooses intentionally. He values compatibility over chemistry. He chooses partnership over excitement. He doesn't need someone to complete him because he is already becoming whole. This makes his love more conscious, more stable, more powerful. Younger women find this refreshing. Many have dealt with men who enter relationships without intention, men who say yes to everything but commit to nothing. A purposeful man is different. He doesn't play games. He doesn't offer more than he can give. He doesn't confuse affection with commitment. He knows what role he wants a partner to play in his life, and he communicates it clearly. Purpose also gives a man natural confidence, not arrogance. Confidence, the kind that comes from self-progress, not self-promotion. A man working on his goals doesn't need to show off. He doesn't need validation. He doesn't need attention. He is too focused on becoming the man he respects. And this quiet confidence is one of the strongest forms of attraction. A purposeful man becomes selective with his environment. He chooses growth over gossip. He chooses discipline over laziness. He chooses meaningful work over meaningless pleasure. And because he values his energy, he automatically values the energy of the people he lets into his life. Younger women respect this. They feel the difference between a man who says, "I don't have time for games," and a man who genuinely doesn't live in the kind of world where games even make sense. Purpose makes him consistent. Consistency makes him trustworthy. Trustworthiness makes him attractive. But perhaps the most important part is this: a purposeful man has a relationship with himself that is strong. This relationship becomes the foundation for every other relationship in his life. He knows how to motivate himself, discipline himself, comfort himself, and push himself. He doesn't look for a partner to save him from his own emptiness. He doesn't need someone to fix him. He doesn't view love as a solution to his problems. He brings himself into the relationship already building his life. Younger women sense this because it changes the entire dynamic. When a man has purpose, he doesn't suffocate a partner. He doesn't rely on her attention for validation. He doesn't collapse when she sets boundaries. He respects her individuality because he respects his own. He wants a partner, not a caretaker, a teammate, not a therapist. He wants growth, not dependency. And this is why purpose is magnetic. It creates a man who stands strong on his own, yet chooses connection from a place of strength rather than need. A man like this inspires, not because he tries to, but because his life becomes evidence of what discipline and clarity can achieve. Younger women admire this energy because it encourages them to grow as well. A purposeful man elevates the space he enters. He raises the standard. He changes the atmosphere. His vision becomes contagious. Purpose is not about what he achieves. It's about who he becomes in the process. A man who lives with purpose becomes rare. And in a world full of distraction, confusion, and unstable energy, rarity is irresistibly attractive. A man who follows purpose doesn't chase approval. He attracts respect. Because in the end, purpose is not a path, it is a pulse. And only the men who follow that pulse become the men others naturally follow.